Okay, is everybody comfortable and seated? My name is Patrick Henry. I'm from Virginia, my beloved Virginia, I might add. I am dedicated to our Virginia only. I don't believe that Virginia or anyone else, as far as this Constitution has been signed, should try to dominate Virginia from outside. I believe in the rights of the states. My real name is Patrick Henry Jr. Now, this may seem unusual that my father was not named Patrick. Patrick Henry Sr. is my uncle, the Reverend Patrick Henry of Hanover County, St. Paul's. He's an Anglican minister, and he preaches at St. Paul's in Hanover, which is a little crossroads town in the backwoods of Virginia. And I am considered somewhat, well, as a country bumpkin. However, just as William Wallace shocked the English aristocracy with his knowledge of Latin, you may have heard about that. Did anybody ever hear about that? That they sent the princess or whoever she was to speak to the savage William Wallace, the savage Scotsman, and it shocked the princess that he could speak fluently in Latin. This was a savage. Well, I somewhat have a similar characteristic, as I could speak Latin, Hebrew, well, little Hebrew, and Greek, as I was taught at home by my father, who was educated in Aberdeenshire, Scotland, and my uncle, the Reverend Patrick Henry Sr., at home. That's where I was taught. I had very little schooling, as I was somewhat uncontrollable, as the teacher would tell my father. So in order to keep me in line, he kept me at home and taught me himself along with my uncle, and even had assigned a young slave, Caesar, who was my age, and to keep me in line, if you can imagine that. And of course, Caesar and I grew to be lifelong friends. And if I might be allowed to project into the future somewhat, I predict that in 1799, when I am most likely to meet Jesus, you see, I can see into the future with uncanny accuracy at times. Caesar will be there at my side. In fact, as a lifelong friend, I had a house built for him and his wife and family right next to mine. At Red Hill, that's my last home. And I had many homes. Oh, over the years, I lived all over Virginia practically. But I want to talk to you today about the importance of education and virtue to protect what we have in a constitution. You see, a society that is not educated and has no control, and with the lack of education comes the lack of control over your elected representatives. Now, as much as I oppose that Constitution because it squinted of monarchy, that we spent time, blood, and treasure to get rid of that monarchy, now they propose a constitution which squints of monarchy and takes away the power of Virginia to govern ourselves. We in Virginia didn't need a constitution. We had a Bill of Rights. We had the Virginia Declaration of Rights, written by my friend George Mason, and to a lesser extent myself. And it guaranteed us everything that, well, this Johnny-come-lately Constitution guarantees, but it guaranteed it on a state level, and long before anyone dreamt it up in Philadelphia. Not only does it look like a monarchy, it gives so much power to a central government that it must, over a period of time, grow to be a bully of the people, to dominate their very life. Governments have done this since the beginning of time. I have read Montesquieu, The Spirit of Laws. And Montesquieu, a French philosopher, has said that it is the general inclination of governments to become dominant over the people. And unless the people are strong and virtuous and moral and ethical, the government will inflict its power and its influence to control their lives. So it's somewhat with trepidation that I guess I have mellowed out in my years. My friend General Washington has told me that, and I respect his opinion greatly, he told me that this Constitution is probably not perfect, but it's the best thing we can do. And hopefully it will work. Well, it will work. It has the potential to work as long as the people who are governed under it are virtuous and moral and ethical. If we lose those three characteristics, then we will collapse, just as Rome did, amid gladiator violent fights and the sexual problems that they all had in ancient Rome. There went virtue, there went ethics, there went morals, there went the empire. I would not want to see that happen to this young country, and we have such great hopes for it. I've often asked, Mr. Henry, do you see a future for this country? And yes, I did. In fact, I put it in writing. I put it in writing with my last will and testament. In fact, I wrote it on the back of the Virginia Resolves against the Stamp Act. Wrote it on the same sheet of paper in the back. And I said, and I quote, well, as best I can remember, I'm getting up in years, American independence, whether it shall be a detriment or an asset, will depend upon its people and their virtue. If they are wise, they will prosper. But if they are not virtuous, they will be miserable. So, person, whoever is reading this, whoever thou might be, practice virtue in thine own sphere and encourage it in others. You can view this document, I'm sure, if you contact the William and Mary Library. It's still there, I'm sure, to this day. I want to caution you on one other thing. The difference between a politician and a statesman. Oh, is there a difference? Oh, I certainly hope so. You see, a politician is involved in his government, and in the back of his mind has his own interests in the forefront. A statesman will forego his own interests and put the interests of his country in front. Oh, Mr. Henry, you say that, but can you prove that you are a statesman? Well, yes, I can, I hope. In 1781, before the war was over, our great contest with England, I was a member of a stock company, the Loyal Company as it was called, and we had a land grant from the king done before the war of 800,000 acres near the confluence of the Ohio and the Mississippi rivers. 800,000 acres, that'd make a pretty good tobacco farm, wouldn't it? Sure would. Sure would. But in 1781, Mr. Mason, myself, and the others in the House of Burgesses decided that our lands of Virginia, which now it included a large bunch of land, what is now the Ohio country, which is what we're standing on, the Ohio country, the Indiana country, the Illinois country, the Wisconsin country, and the Minnesota country. All was Virginia. We decided that this was too much like a large central government, and it really couldn't be governed properly when at such time as people settle within its borders. So together, what we did is we gave this land, the land you're standing on, to the Confederation of States. We weren't an independent country yet. We were still fighting. But we were under the Articles of Confederation. Now, we gave all this land to the Confederation. And do you know, when we did that, we knew that it would nullify the claims for our 800,000 acres. So we put the betterment of our country before our own interests, even though it cost us. And I'm sure that someone will probably build a great brewery on that land, probably make the best beer in this part of the world. Maybe even the whole world, I don't know. So that's one time when I did it. And I helped do it. I wasn't the only one. I can't take credit for being alone in that matter. There was another time, it was after the war. The Federalists, young Madison and his friends, were all very, very doubtful about whether they should welcome back the people who were Tories, the people who were loyal to the king, to come back to their land and take it, because it had been seized, because they were loyal to the king. I objected to it, to the utter amazement of Mr. Madison and of the other Federalists. How can you welcome these people back after the horrible war that had gone on, with the Virginians that had lost their lives among all the others? How can you do that? And I will quote what I said. Gentlemen, we have just defeated the British Lion. Why should we be afraid of his whelps? These people have done nothing wrong. They have been loyal to their king. An admirable quality. And we have a country to build here. We must build Virginia and make Virginia grow. And to have these people back will be a boon to that effect. They have the knowledge of being tradesmen and merchants. They will probably grow into being our best trading partners. And not only upon that, they've only been loyal to their king. Is that so bad? They will help it grow. They will help Virginia grow. And in 2 generations, their offspring will be just as loyal to Virginia and to this United States as they were to their king. They will grow into being Americans just as we Whigs, those who are, by Whigs I mean those who are loyal to the patriot cause. They will be just as great a patriots as the rest. So even though I didn't have that great love of Tories, I can assure you, I did what I thought was best for my country in welcoming these people back, hopefully to convert them to be just as American as anyone else. So there are 2 occasions. Now, in Virginia, there are only 3 people that get paid a salary in the government of Virginia. That's the governor himself, because he must suspend his career, whatever that might be, to be the governor, and the treasurer, who must also do the same thing, and the Speaker of the House of Burgesses, the Virginia Assembly. Those are the 3. The rest of the Burgesses and all other members of the state government are paid only the expenses that they accrue. They are remunerated for their expenses. If we ever get to the point of paying people to do the just and honest work for their fellow citizens or fellow Virginians, we are opening the door to so many troubles. Montesquieu, just read Montesquieu. He'll explain it to you. It must be work that comes from the heart, not work that is done because of the wallet. Now some of you, I guess, have heard the thing about liberty or death. I was very shocked that you heard about that. At the time, I just spoke those words in Richmond on March 23rd, 1775. I did it without notes. It was extemporaneous. As a matter of fact, the words were not even taken down by the several men who were supposed to take the notes because they were so enthralled with that speech. It was only put together later on by 7 or 8 gentlemen who together tried to recall my speech as best they could. And very few probably know under what circumstances that speech was given. It was a very difficult time, sir. Very difficult. The port of Boston was just closed in response to our friends, our Bostonian friends, who made the harbor the greatest teapot that ever existed. Oh yes, they dumped East India tea. Oh, come right in. Come right in, fellow Virginians. Oh my goodness, where did they all come from? It looks as though Parliament has just been released. Okay. I think Jefferson Davis was done with his. At any rate, Boston Harbor was full of tea. Oh, it floated in big piles. Why, it landed on the beaches several miles away, big piles of this tea. And the king in response to this act of rebellion, closed the port of Boston. Why, that would be like somebody shutting down this part of Ohio and shutting down the soap. Everyone in Boston made their living off of the commerce that came through that port. And if they didn't make a living directly, they made a living indirectly, whether it be the manufacture of ropes or sails or outfitting ships or whatever. The whole town was unemployed. And not only that, on top of that, the king interfered with the people's natural rights to a government of their own, because he shut down the government of Massachusetts Bay Colony. He fired everyone within the government of Massachusetts Bay and made all government officials payable by Parliament, which made them not even responsible to the people. Well, that would be kind of a difficulty. What if, madam, what if you owed this lady some money and refused to pay her? How would you collect? You didn't have a government to go to sue the lady for your money. Am I correct? Imagine that same thing. Imagine marriage licenses. Imagine almost anything that you need from your government. That's what the people of Boston were up against. And they were looking for help. Well, all the other colonies gave help in one form or another, whether we sent money, whether we sent food. And to put it mildly, they were looking for help from the wealthiest, the most populous colony, Virginia. And nothing came from Virginia until one of our members of the House of Burgesses made a proposition that we have a day set aside for mourning and solidarity with our brethren in Boston. Why, when our royal governor heard of this proposition, he didn't like the sound of it. Well, I don't blame him. He was appointed by the king. What did we expect? So he dissolved the House of Burgesses. Now, we were in the same boat as Massachusetts. We had no House of Burgesses. So we did what any red-blooded Virginian would do when confronted with a problem such as this. We went straight to the tavern. Well, we did. We went to the Raleigh Tavern, as a matter of fact. We had our own session of the House of Burgesses, even though it was not endorsed by our royal governor, which we actually did not care. We met in the Apollo Room at the Raleigh Tavern, its owner being sympathetic to our cause. And we decided, our committee of correspondence decided, that we should send out a notice that we were to have a meeting of our House of Burgesses. But we were not going to have this meeting at a place where our royal governor had Marines who would love nothing better than to torture test easy for me to say, torture test their bayonets upon us. So we met in Richmond. Richmond being a little settlement, but it had a large church, St. John's Church. And the pastor at that church was one in sympathy with our cause.
Mr. Henry, could I interrupt you just one moment? Some of these young people...
Of course, come right up. The floor is open. The floor is open. Surround me. Surround me, O Mason comets. I didn't realize I had such a large fan club in the savage wilderness of Ohio. I very rarely get to the savage wilderness, although it's obvious you have made it quite comfortable. Okay, do we have everybody? Very good. Love those comets, huh? Okay. I assume many of you are not comets. I see one that says Princeton. Have you been to New Jersey lately? Yeah, I see your thing says Princeton. And yours says Mason. I have a friend named George Mason. So I went to Richmond. I went to St. John's Church. There were 120 members of the House of Burgesses. We were growing. When I first started in the House of Burgesses, there were only 90. We were adding counties that became populous enough to become counties, and it grew. There were 2 representatives from each county. So that shows our growth. In fact, at this time, Kentucky became a county. The entire state of what is now called Kentucky had enough people to become a county. In fact, you might have known the first representative from the county of Kentucky. What was his name? Boone. Daniel Boone. Have you ever heard of that gentleman?
I know him.
You know him? Good. So anyway, at Richmond, after all the Tidewater people, the rich people in the Tidewater region, does anyone know what Tidewater means? You might not. You see, the rivers near the coast are subject to the tides. In other words, their flow slows down when the tide comes in. In fact, the river might rise some. And that's why it's called Tidewater. Those were all very rich people. Old families that have come home, as early as 1630, 1640. And myself, I was part of those who came late. That's why I lived in the backwoods. A country bumpkin, so to speak. I had to move west. That's where the land was. So at any rate, the Tidewater people were all speaking about how we should seek a settlement with King George III. We should have peace at any cost because the British Army and Navy is the most powerful in the world. They had just defeated the French and the Spanish. They were the world superpower. And here we are, just 3 million country people in a long removed continent from Great Britain. We would be crushed, no doubt. So they told us that we must have peace at any cost. That's where I got my reputation as a hothead. You know, I must tell this story upon myself. I had the nickname Son of Thunder. Now, I got that nickname honestly because once, as I was railing against a tax, and some of the fellow Burgesses in the House agreed with that tax, although I did not. I almost always fought against taxation because it's almost always unjust to one class or another. And while I was railing against this tax, a thunderstorm broke out, a really nice, brisk Virginia thunderstorm, complete with lightning and thunder, and it was so close that many of the representatives ducked under the table in fear. But I didn't let it stop me. I kept on railing against that tax, just as if God was punctuating my speech. And that's where I got the name Son of Thunder. So anyway, After the Tidewater rich had advocated settlement with the king, I raised my hand to be recognized by our presiding officer, Peyton Randolph of Williamsburg. Thank you, Mr. Randolph, for recognizing me. No one in this House has more respect or admiration for the very patriotic men who have just addressed this House. But there are times when men see the same subject under different lights. And I hope that it is not thought disrespectful of me, holding as I do an opinion quite opposite of theirs, express myself freely and without reserve. For this is an awful moment for this country. For my own part, I consider it as nothing less than a question of freedom or of slavery. And if I were to withhold my true opinion for fear of giving offense, I would be guilty of treason to my country and an offense against the majesty of heaven, whom I revere above all earthly kings. I wish to know the truth, whatever it might be, so that I might prepare for it. I have one lamp by which my feet are guided. That is the lamp of experience. I can only judge the future by what I have seen in the past. And judging by the past, I wish to know what there has been within the actions of our Parliament and its ministry that gives such hope of reconciliation to some of the gentlemen in this House. Is it that insidious smile by which our late petitions have been received? Trust it not, sir. It will prove a snare at your feet. Suffer yourselves not to be betrayed by a kiss. Ask yourselves, how does this comport with the armies and the navies that are presently in Boston? Are these the acts of reconciliation? Nay. These are the tools of subjugation. Have we shown ourselves to be so unwilling to be reconciled that force must be called in to win back our love? Fool yourselves not, gentlemen. Do not deceive yourselves. They are here to bind and rivet those chains upon which, for the last 10 years, Parliament and the ministry has been forging. And they are here to put them on your wrists. Oh, well, ask yourselves, are they here on our account? Well, sir, Mr. Randolph, does Britain have any enemies in this quarter of the globe to require such an array of army and navy? Nay, they have none. They are here for us. They can be for no other. They are here to subjugate us. Oh, we have petitioned, we have remonstrated, we have supplicated, we have thrown ourselves before the throne, prostrate before the throne. And what has been the result? Our opinions, our petitions have been denied. Our supplications have been disregarded. And our remonstrations have produced more insult. And after all this, can any man in this house be able to have the luxury to cling to the hopes of reconciliation? Nay, none of us have that luxury. Do not deceive yourself, gentlemen. If we wish to be free, if we wish to preserve and violate those inestimable privileges by which we have been so long contending, we must fight. I'll say that again, sir. We must fight. An appeal to God and to arms is all that is left us. Oh, they say we are weak. We are unable to cope with such a formidable foe. When will we be stronger? Will it be next week? Will it be next year? Will it be when there is a British soldier quartered in every home? Will we gain the spirit of resistance by inaction? Will we gain strength by clinging to that delusive phantom of hope for reconciliation until we are bound hand and foot? We are not weak. 3 million of people armed in the holy cause of liberty cannot be defeated by any enemy they may send against us. And besides, there is a just God in heaven who presides over the destinies of nations seeking liberty. He will send friends that will fight battles alongside us. Besides, we have no election. To retreat now would result in slavery from our king. The battle does not belong to the strong alone, but to the active, the brave, the vigilant. Do not deceive yourselves, gentlemen. The next gale that blows in from the north off the plains of Boston will bring with it to our ears the clash of resounding arms. Our brethren are already in the field. Why stand we here idle? What is it the gentlemen wish? What would they have? Is life so sweet? Is peace so dear as to be purchased at the price of chains and of slavery? Good Lord, forbid it! I know not what course others might take. But as for me, give me liberty or give me death. Now that speech given to those members of the House of Burgesses put the militia, well, after it was a vote was taken, the militia was put on double drills. Musket balls were being molded. Cannons were being manufactured. And Virginia was put on a stance that it would be able to defend itself. And with it came, as you know, our revolution. So enough of me jabbering about. Oh, one other thing I might add. I believe Mr. Wythe said I stole that. I wish to reply to that. You see, his friend, his protege, Mr. Jefferson, if you read the Mecklenburg Declaration, where the county of Mecklenburg, North Carolina, declared independence 14 months before they got around to it in Philadelphia. In fact, it's probably on the North Carolina state flag. There's a date of May 20th, 1774. So they did that long before, and Jefferson took many of the phrases from the Mecklenburg Declaration, and if you read both documents, the Declaration of Independence and the Mecklenburg Declaration, you will find that Mr. Wyeth's protege borrowed those phrases from others. Now, that phrase about give me liberty or give me death, it was taken from that play written by Addison called Cato. It was George Washington's favorite play. In fact, it was done at Valley Forge at his request to the soldiers. Cato was seen by every member of that House of Burgesses at least a dozen times. And with my stabbing of myself, Cato has, in that play, Cato is faced with a problem. He must decide whether it is better to live under tyranny or to take his own life. And by myself, with the give me liberty or give me death, put those Burgesses in Cato's position and made them better able to relate. So that's what I was doing. I have a few minutes here. I can field any questions that anyone, or queries, curiosities that anyone might have. Anyone have any curiosities? Yes, ma'am.
Did you have any, how were you involved in the Revolutionary War? Did people that advocated, and wrote the documents, did they also fight, or were they kind of behind the scenes?
The question was, how did I take part in the Revolutionary War? And did some of the people who wrote those documents take part in the fighting? Yes, they did take part in the fighting, many of them. In fact, wasn't it the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Dickerson? Yes, from Pennsylvania, I believe. What was his name? I think it was. He refused to sign the Declaration of Independence, but he enlisted in the Pennsylvania militia, took part in the war. I was, on July 4th, 1776, I was not in Philadelphia. I was in Virginia. I was doing something. I would have signed the Declaration, don't get me wrong. I certainly would have. But I was doing something I felt was important too. I was being elected the first free governor of Virginia. And that to me was much more important at the time. There were 56 others who signed that declaration. Thank God for them. If I had been there, I'd have been number 57. George Washington didn't sign it either. He was busy being the general. He was on his way to Boston, as a matter of fact, when he took over on, I think it was July 15th, he made it to Boston and commanded the army. Any other questions that anyone might be curious about? Yes, I had 17 children, and they called George Washington the father of his country. Some justice, huh? But I had a son who served in the Revolutionary War as an artilleryman in the Battle of Saratoga. He suffered psychological problems. After the battle, he could read, so he was a lieutenant. He was made a lieutenant, and if you could read, you were probably going to be an officer. After the battle, he took his sword, went among the dead and wounded in the battlefield, and he had a breakdown. He took his sword, broke it over his knee, and sobbed as he viewed the Hessians, Indians, English, Americans, Continentals, dead and dying. George Washington sent me a letter describing the situation. He sent my son to New Jersey to a physician who was skilled at curing these maladies. He said that soldiers have been having these types of problems since war and since human beings have walked the earth. And that as soon as my son was cured, he would send him back from New Jersey to Virginia to join his family. And surely enough, he did. Any other questions? I have time for maybe one more before the veterans salute outside. Any others? Nothing? Nothing about the war? Nothing about the House of Burgess? Yes, sir, I see one. What did I do after the Revolutionary War? I was governor of Virginia 5 times over, and I served in Virginia to one degree or another as either governor or a member of the House, off and on until, actually, when George Washington was elected as first president, he offered me several jobs. Now, he offered me to be, he asked if I wanted to be the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And I turned him down. Now, you have to remember, Washington and I had a parting of the ways with the adoption of this Constitution. He was in favor, I was against. He also asked me if I wanted to be the first Secretary of State. I turned him down. Finally, he asked if I wanted to be ambassador to France. I turned him down. Nothing personal, General, but I believe that being in charge of Virginia is the important thing, not a central government. I did mellow in that I accepted the central government. It was against my better judgment. But if so many very gifted and intelligent people were for it, it must have some merit. So I mellowed out. Maybe I should not have. Any other curiosities? None? Well, the veteran... okay.
We hear about the Valley Forge winter.
Yes.
And how was life in Virginia during that?
Well, Valley Forge, the winter in Valley Forge was not restricted to Valley Forge. It was a tough winter all over. Some people said it was a mini ice age. I don't know if somebody in Tennessee said that or not. But it was cold all over. The only one that was worse was in New Jersey. When the Army was in New Jersey, it was even colder than at Valley Forge. Although we all got along in Virginia, we were home snug in our cabins. Yes, one last question, sir.
I want to know, you said you were named after your uncle.
Yes.
And instead of your name, you're called Junior. Then why aren't you named after your father?
Because that's just what they named me, after my uncle, the Anglican minister. My father thought that it would honor my uncle, who was his older brother, and that he admired greatly. It's just an oddity. It's not totally unheard of, but it's not done very often anymore, I wouldn't think. The veterans who went out there and shed the blood are going to do a salute to all the veterans. And I think it would probably be best if you went out and paid your respects. I'll be around if anyone wants to take a quick portrait with one of those machines, if you like.